The air chokes with the metallic tang of blood and fear. A Modenese pikeman, barely out of boyhood, screams as a Bolognese knight's horse thunders past, its hooves churning the already sodden earth into a slick, gruesome paste. The battlefield, a gentle slope near Zappolino, has become a grinding maw, swallowing men whole. Arrows rain down, whistling like malevolent spirits, finding soft targets in the gaps of armor. Swords clang, axes hack, and the guttural cries of men in mortal combat echo across the valley, a dreadful symphony of impending death. This isn't a skirmish, it's a maelstrom. Thousands of men, common foot soldiers, proud knights, and seasoned mercenaries are locked in a desperate struggle, their lives measured in heartbeats, their fate sealed by the swing of a blade. The sun, a pale winter disk, dips towards the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows that writhe like specters among the living and the dying. A Modenese banner emblazoned with a golden eagle flutters defiantly, stained with mud and splattered crimson. Then a roar rises, not of defiance, but of panic. The Bolognese line is breaking, splintering under the relentless assault. Men turn, dropping their weapons, their faces contorted in terror, fleeing for their lives, their backs exposed to the pursuing blades. Victory, brutal and absolute, is within reach. But what in the name of God could possibly drive men to such savage, relentless carnage? Before the stench of death permeated the air, before the clatter of steel became the dominant sound, life in the Po Valley hummed with a different rhythm. Modena, a bustling city surrounded by fertile plains, was a hub of trade and agriculture. Its citizens, primarily Ghibelline in their political leanings, worked their fields, crafted their wares, and congregated in lively piazzas, discussing harvests, prices, and the latest gossip. Children chased pigeons in the shadow of the Gerland in a tower, their laughter echoing through the narrow streets. Just 40 miles north, Bologna, a larger, more powerful city, thrived with an even greater intellectual and economic vibrancy. Home to one of Europe's oldest universities, its streets teemed with students and scholars from across the continent, debating philosophy and law in arcaded courtyards. Merchants haggled over silks and spices in the bustling markets, and artisans meticulously fashioned their goods, contributing to a rich tapestry of daily existence. These were communities of industrious people, with complex social structures, vibrant cultures, and deep-rooted traditions. Families endured hardships, celebrated joys, and built futures, much like any other people. Yet beneath this veneer of everyday normalcy, a potent undercurrent of tension, suspicion, and simmering resentment flowed. Generations had inherited grievances, petty disputes, and perceived slights that, like slow-burning embers, merely awaited the right gust of wind to ignite into a raging inferno. The peace, it turned out, was always precarious, always on the verge of shattering. And the trigger, when it came, would be deceptively simple. To grasp the true forces at play in 1325, we must understand the seismic ideological cleavage that rent medieval Italy asunder, the struggle between the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. This wasn't merely a local squabble, it was the manifestation of a centuries-old contest for supremacy between two colossal powers. On one side, the Guelphs, staunch supporters of the papacy, envisioned an Italy guided by the spiritual and temporal authority of the Pope in Rome. On the other, the Ghibellines championed the Holy Roman Emperor, believing his imperial authority to be the legitimate head of Christendom. These weren't abstract political debates, they dictated alliances, trade routes, and even who governed local towns. Modena, historically aligned with the Ghibellines, saw its fortunes tied to the emperor, upholding a tradition of imperial loyalty. Bologna, a formidable Guelph stronghold, pledged its allegiance to the Pope, often acting as a bulwark against Ghibelline expansion. This rivalry was etched into the very fabric of their identities. By the early 14th century, particularly under the reign of Pope John XXII and Emperor Louis IV, this struggle intensified, spilling over into proxy wars fought by powerful city-states and their formidable mercenary armies. Every border dispute, every raid, every diplomatic slight between Modena and Bologna was not just a local incident. It was a microcosm of a much larger, continent-spanning power game. The year 1325 specifically saw a fever pitch of this tension, exacerbated by recent military setbacks for Guelph forces and a growing boldness among Ghibelline factions. The stage was set not just for a war between two cities, but for another bloody chapter in a centuries-long epic. And the players, unwitting pawns in this grander design, were about to be drawn into its tragic conclusion. The piece, such as it was, began to fray years before the mud of Zappolino tasted blood. The first tremors of discord were subtle, easily dismissed by those who preferred the comfort of denial. For decades, the borderlands between Modena and Bologna had been a patchwork of disputed territories, small villages, and valuable farmlands claimed by both sides. These were not clear-cut lines drawn on a map, but fluid, often violent, zones of contention. In the years leading up to 1325, particularly from around 1320 onwards, these minor skirmishes escalated. Modenese forces, often small contingents of cavalry or raiding parties, would venture into Bolognese territory, not in open warfare, but in calculated acts of provocation. They might steal cattle, burn a barn belonging to a Guelph sympathizer, or harass local villagers, testing the Bolognese response, pushing the boundaries of their patience. Conversely, Bolognese patrols would occasionally retaliate, capturing Modenese peasants or burning their crops, perpetuating a cycle of low-level violence that simmered beneath the surface of official diplomacy. These incidents individually seemed minor, isolated acts of brigandage or overzealous patrols. They were reported, complaints were lodged, but no formal declaration of war followed. Local lords and city councils, perhaps wary of igniting a wider conflict, often downplayed their significance, choosing instead to send envoys and issue stern warnings. Yet each act, no matter how small, chipped away at the fragile peace, fostering a deep sense of mistrust and animosity among the common people who lived on these contested frontiers. The seeds of a larger conflict were being sown, nurtured by indifference and a refusal to acknowledge the cumulative weight of these minor aggressions. A breaking point, it was clear, was fast approaching. The delicate dance of diplomatic warnings and retaliatory raids snapped abruptly in the summer of 1325. No longer content with minor provocations, the Modenese took a brazen step that pushed the region past the point of no return. On the morning of July 29th, a significant Modenese force, far larger and more organized than previous raiding parties, crossed deep into Bolognese territory. Their target, the castrum of Monteveglio, a crucial defensive outpost and a symbol of Bolognese power in the disputed borderlands. This was no cattle raid. This was a direct military assault on a fortified position, unmistakably an act of war. The Modenese besieged Monteveglio, overwhelming its defenders and capturing it after fierce fighting. The brutality of the attack, the swiftness of the conquest, and the strategic importance of the captured fortress sent shockwaves through Bologna. This wasn't merely a border infraction, it was a grievous insult, a direct challenge to Bologna's sovereignty and military might. The city council of Bologna, previously hesitant to commit to full-scale war, now found itself with no choice. The cries for vengeance were deafening, echoing through the university halls and market squares. Diplomatic channels, already strained, collapsed entirely. Messengers were dispatched to Guelph allies, notably Florence and the Papal States, requesting immediate military assistance. The act of aggression at Monteveglio had crossed an invisible line, irrevocably poisoning any chance of peaceful resolution. It was a declaration of intent, a gauntlet thrown down with explicit belligerence. The Modenese, emboldened by their success, seemed to relish the impending conflict, their Ghibelline pride swelling. A city that had once merely endured skirmishes was now mobilizing for total war, its citizens steeling themselves for the inevitable onslaught. The quiet fear had now solidified into grim determination, a collective resolve that promised a bloody reckoning. Bologna's reaction to the fall of Monteveglio was swift and furious. The city's ruling council, led by the influential Giovanna, immediately initiated a full-scale mobilization. Emissaries were dispatched with urgent pleas, and soon, allied Guelph forces began to trickle, then flood into the city. From Florence came contingents of well-equipped infantry and renowned crossbowmen. From Parma, Ferrara, and Ravenna arrived cavalry and additional foot soldiers, swelling Bologna's ranks. The Pope himself, John XXII, lent his spiritual authority and the promise of more material aid, reinforcing Bologna's conviction that God was on their side. The Bolognese army that assembled in early November was truly formidable, perhaps 30,000 strong, a mixture of local militia, professional mercenaries, and allied detachments. It was a host designed not just to repel an invasion, but to crush Modenese ambition decisively. Their objective was clear: reclaim Monteveglio, humble Modena, and reassert Guelph dominance in the region. The sheer scale of this assembly was unprecedented for a local conflict, transforming what might have been a regional dispute into a major medieval engagement. Yet amid this formidable show of force, a subtle disquiet began to emerge among some of the Bolognese commanders. Their intelligence reports indicated that the Modenese force, though smaller, was fiercely disciplined and led by the formidable Francesco Bonicalci, the Lord of Modena. They also noted a curious overconfidence among the Bolognese ranks, a belief in their numerical superiority that bordered on arrogance. This hubris, some veterans privately worried, could be a fatal flaw. For all the gleaming armor and fluttering banners, something about this massive, seemingly invincible army didn't quite add up. Everything pointed to the capture of Monteveglio as the undeniable spark for this colossal conflict, a strategic maneuver that escalated border skirmishes into outright war. The chronicles, the diplomatic exchanges, the sheer scale of the Bolognese mobilization all indicated a direct, military-driven casus belli. But then a peculiar detail emerges from the dusty annals of history, a detail so trivial, so seemingly absurd, that it has come to define the entire conflict, often overshadowing the brutal realities of war and politics. The story, as popularly told, is that the two cities went to war over a stolen wooden bucket. This narrative, perpetuated through centuries, paints a picture of ridiculous medieval folly, men fighting and dying for a common household item. However, the historical record, when examined closely, offers a crucial pivot. The infamous wooden bucket was not stolen before the Battle of Zappolino, triggering the conflict. It was not even the subject of diplomatic protests or ultimatums. Instead, the Modenese, after their stunning and decisive victory at Zappolino on November 15, 1325, marched triumphantly through the utterly humiliated Bolognese countryside. Emboldened by their overwhelming success and eager to add insult to injury, a detachment of Modenese soldiers entered the very heart of Bologna, breached the city walls, and proceeded to the well in the Piazza Grande. There, as a final, mocking gesture of victory and disdain for their defeated rivals, they unceremoniously took a simple oak bucket, cut its rope, and carried it back to Modena as a trophy. The bucket was a consequence of the war, a symbol of Modenese triumph, not its cause. This subtle yet profound shift in timing reframes the entire narrative, stripping away the simplistic absurdity and revealing a deeper, more chilling truth behind the War of the Bucket. The pivot clarifies that the bucket was a trophy, not a trigger. But what then truly drove the cities to such a devastating war? The answer lies far deeper than a simple pail, burrowed into the very bedrock of medieval Italian politics and economics. The Guelph-Ghibelline divide was not just an ideological preference, it translated into tangible power, wealth, and survival. Modena, a Ghibelline city, consistently sought to expand its influence and territory, often at the expense of its larger, wealthier Guelph neighbor, Bologna. Bologna, with its powerful university and strategic location on vital trade routes, represented a significant obstacle to Modenese ambitions. Their rivalry was fueled by competing claims over fertile borderlands and control of key fortifications, each inch of disputed territory representing potential wealth and defensive advantage. Beyond this, influential families within each city often leveraged the larger Guelph-Ghibelline conflict to advance their own local agendas, settle private feuds, and secure power. In Modena, the Bonicalci family, lords of the city, saw an opportunity to consolidate their power and expand their dominion. In Bologna, the Papal and other prominent Guelph families were equally invested in maintaining their city's ascendancy and their own authority. The war, therefore, was a complex brew of geopolitical strategy, economic competition, and dynastic ambition, all cloaked in the grander, more palatable narratives of loyalty to emperor or pope. The bucket in this context was not a cause but a final, potent symbol of dominance, a public declaration that Modena had not only won the battle, but had also effectively trampled on Bologna's pride and sovereignty. It was a calculated insult designed to sting, to rub salt into the fresh wounds of defeat, rather than initiating the fight itself. The conflict was always going to happen. The bucket simply provided a convenient, almost cartoonish, postscript to a war driven by far more profound and brutal realities. Beneath the grand narratives of emperors, popes, and warring city-states lay the devastating human cost. Consider Giovanna, a 22-year-old peasant woman from a small village near Zappolino, whose life, like countless others, was irrevocably shattered. Her husband, Matteo, a sturdy farmer of 25, had been conscripted into the Bolognese militia just weeks before the fateful battle. He wasn't a knight or even a skilled mercenary. He was a man of the earth, forced to trade his plow for a spear. Giovanna remembered his last embrace, the hurried promise to return by the next harvest, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and reluctant duty. On November 15th, Matteo was caught in the Bolognese rout. He was one of the estimated 2,000 Bolognese soldiers who perished that day, many cut down as they fled, others drowned in the muddy ditches. Giovanna never saw his body. Weeks later, a messenger, one of the few survivors from her village, brought news of his likely death, along with others. Her home, a small cottage she had helped Matteo build, was raided by Modenese stragglers, its meager stores plundered, its carefully tended garden trampled. The promise of the next harvest, of children to fill their home, of a future carved out of the fertile soil, was broken. Giovanna was left alone, without land, without support, her dreams reduced to ashes in the wake of a war she neither understood nor cared for, a war fought over ambitions far beyond her comprehension. Her story was not unique. It was replicated hundreds, if not thousands, of times across the ravaged countryside. Families were torn apart, livelihoods destroyed, communities shattered, all for the pride of powerful lords and the abstract loyalties of distant rulers. The War of the Bucket for Giovanna was not a comical anecdote. It was a life sentence of grief and destitution. Her quiet suffering encapsulates the true horror, the personal tragedies buried beneath the historical summaries of victories and defeats. And her shattered life serves as a stark reminder of the often forgotten casualties of grand conflicts. In the immediate aftermath of the War of the Bucket, a curious narrative began to take hold. While the Modenese celebrated their decisive victory and proudly displayed their wooden trophy, the Bolognese, desperate to salvage some dignity from their crushing defeat, found themselves in a propaganda bind. To admit they had been utterly routed in a major battle, losing thousands of men in a key fortress, was a monumental blow to their prestige. But to frame the entire conflict as a ludicrous escalation over a stolen bucket, that ironically provided a peculiar kind of solace. It allowed them to present the Modenese as petty and absurd, fighting a war for a trivial object, rather than acknowledging their own military inadequacy and strategic blunders. This simple, almost comical, explanation quickly spread, perpetuated by subsequent chroniclers and even poets eager for an amusing tale. It effectively obscured the deep-seated political, economic, and territorial rivalries that truly fueled the conflict. Who benefited from this simplification? Both sides in a strange way. The Modenese could point to the bucket as a symbol of their complete triumph and their rivals' humiliation, transforming a military trophy into the very essence of the casus belli. The Bolognese, while officially protesting the theft, could subtly shift the focus from their battlefield incompetence to the perceived absurdity of their enemy. This narrative of a war over a bucket became a convenient historical shorthand, easy to remember and entertaining to recount, effectively burying the complex realities under a layer of light-hearted anachronism. The true causes, the grinding political struggles, the ambitions of powerful families, and the thousands of lives tragically lost, faded into the background, eclipsed by the enduring myth of the stolen pail. The silence around these deeper motivations allowed subsequent generations to overlook the harsh lessons of medieval power struggles, preferring instead the comforting simplicity of a bizarre, almost comical, historical footnote. For centuries, the story of the War of the Bucket remained largely unchallenged, a quaint and perplexing footnote in medieval history. It was only with the advent of more rigorous historical methodology, particularly from the 19th century onwards, that scholars began to look beyond the popular anecdote. Historians, acting almost like forensic investigators, meticulously sifted through vast archives, city council minutes, diplomatic correspondence between the various Italian city-states and the papacy, financial records of mercenary companies, and multiple contemporary chronicles written from both Modenese and Bolognese perspectives, as well as those of neutral observers like Florentine and Venetian scribes. What they found was a stark contradiction to the prevailing myth. While the bucket's theft was indeed reported, it was consistently described as occurring after the Battle of Zappolino, a triumphant act of plunder rather than a casus belli. More importantly, these documents revealed decades of escalating tensions, specific border disputes over castles like Monteveglio, economic rivalries concerning trade routes and river access, and a relentless pattern of cross-border raids and counter-raids. Letters from Pope John XXII explicitly detail his concerns about the Ghibelline resurgence in Emilia-Romagna, directly naming Modena as a growing threat to papal interests. Similarly, Modenese records underscore their ambition to expand their territorial control and diminish Bologna's regional power. The investigators of history discovered that the conflict was not born of spontaneous absurdity, but was the culmination of deeply entrenched geopolitical strategies, power struggles, and material interests. The bucket was merely a footnote, a symbol of victory, rather than the core reason for the bloodshed. This meticulous re-examination of primary sources finally allowed the true, grim tapestry of power and ambition to emerge from beneath the entertaining, but ultimately misleading, veil of popular folklore. The official explanation, or rather the widely accepted popular narrative, of the War of the Bucket is beguilingly simple. Two Italian cities, consumed by petty pride, plunged into a bloody conflict over a stolen wooden bucket. It's an easy story to tell, a quirky anecdote that often elicits chuckles or head-shaking incredulity. This narrative suggests an almost childish impulsiveness, painting the people of Modena and Bologna as irrational hotheads who couldn't overlook a trivial slight. But why doesn't this explanation fully hold up? Firstly, it ignores the immense logistical and financial undertaking of medieval warfare. Raising an army of 30,000 men, sustaining them, and engaging in a full-scale battle was a monumental endeavor, far too costly and complex to be initiated solely for a household item. Such actions required significant political will, widespread popular support, and clear, strategic objectives. Secondly, it conveniently sidesteps the deep, systemic issues of 14th century Italy. To attribute the war to a bucket is to ignore the centuries-long Guelph-Ghibelline struggle, the constant vying for regional hegemony, the economic rivalries, and the ambitious machinations of powerful ruling families. It reduces a complex geopolitical reality to a cartoonish caricature. Thirdly, the very timing of the bucket's theft, asterisk after the decisive battle, dismantles the idea of it being a casus belli. If the war was fought asterisk over the bucket, its theft would have had to precede the hostilities, not follow them as a spoil of war. The war over a bucket narrative, while enduringly popular and even charming in its absurdity, functions as a convenient historical obfuscation. It provided an easily digestible, if profoundly misleading, explanation that allowed both contemporary observers and future generations to avoid grappling with the uncomfortable complexities of medieval power, politics, and the grim realities of human conflict. It's a story that's too simple to be true, a pleasant fiction that masks a much darker, more intricate reality. The closest truth to the War of the Bucket is far less whimsical and significantly more chilling. This was not a war of absurdity, but a war of unstoppable forces, a clash of deep-seated ideological, territorial, and economic imperatives that had been building for decades, if not centuries. Modena, a rising Ghibelline power, sought to break the encirclement by its Guelph neighbors and expand its influence. Bologna, a formidable Guelph stronghold, was determined to maintain its dominance and protect its vital trade routes and agricultural lands. The taking of Monteveglio by the Modenese was the final, direct military provocation, the unmistakable declaration of war. It was an act of strategic aggression designed to undermine Bologna's territorial integrity and challenge its very authority. The Bolognese response, mobilizing a massive army, was not an overreaction to a petty slight, but a necessary defense of their sovereignty and a bid to reassert their regional hegemony. The bucket, therefore, was not the catalyst for war, but rather the ultimate insult, a poignant symbol of a victor's contempt for the vanquished. It was a tangible piece of evidence, a physical manifestation of Bologna's humiliation and Modena's triumph, a trophy to be paraded and preserved. Historians now largely agree that the war was an inevitable consequence of the profound Guelph-Ghibelline schism in 14th century Italy, coupled with intense local rivalries for land, resources, and prestige. The bucket story, while colorful, serves as a distraction from the brutal political realities that led to thousands of deaths. It was a war driven by power, ambition, and deep-seated animosity, with the bucket merely becoming an enduring, almost mocking, emblem of its lopsided conclusion. And this nuanced understanding reveals a much darker, more profound lesson about human conflict. The most disturbing fact in the entire story of the War of the Bucket isn't the triviality of the trophy, nor the centuries-old political machinations. It's the sheer, unadulterated, and often overlooked scale of the human cost for an outcome that, in the grand sweep of history, changed very little. On November 15, 1325, at the Battle of Zappolino, a truly horrifying slaughter took place. Of the approximately 30,000 Bolognese and allied Guelph soldiers who marched with such arrogance, an estimated 2,000 lost their lives in the span of a few hours. That's 1 in 15 men butchered, drowned, or trampled to death in a desperate rout, their bodies left to rot in the mud or be plundered for whatever meager valuables they possessed. The Modenese victory was overwhelming, but it was purchased with an ocean of blood. Beyond the immediate casualties, the aftermath was equally brutal. The Modenese forces, after their triumph, ransacked the Bolognese countryside, burning crops, destroying villages, and seizing property. Countless civilians were displaced, impoverished, or worse. Bologna itself, though not completely sacked, suffered a catastrophic blow to its prestige, its economic stability, and its sense of security, the psychological wounds festering for generations. All of this, the immense sacrifice of life, the widespread devastation, the lasting trauma, was unleashed not because of a bucket, but because of power, pride, and an unrelenting historical animosity. Yet what did it truly achieve? Modena secured some borderlands, momentarily asserted its dominance. Bologna was humbled. But the larger Guelph-Ghibelline conflict continued unabated for decades. The war was a furious, bloody spasm that consumed thousands of lives, leaving behind only grief, ruin, and a wooden pail as a chilling reminder of its savage cost. This utter disproportion between the suffering inflicted and the ephemeral gains achieved is the true, most profoundly disturbing horror of the War of the Bucket. The War of the Bucket, ostensibly fought over a stolen wooden pail, offers a profound and sobering glimpse into the human condition. It strips away the romanticism of medieval warfare and exposes the raw, often absurd, motivations that drive people to unthinkable violence. This story is not merely a quirky anecdote from a distant past, it is a mirror reflecting our own persistent folly. How often, even today, do we see conflicts ignite from seemingly trivial sparks, only to reveal layers of deeper, unaddressed grievances, political, economic, or ideological? How often do symbols of perceived insult become potent catalysts for bloodshed, obscuring the true, often complex, underlying tensions? The human cost, then as now, remains devastatingly real, yet so easily forgotten in the retelling of history. The bucket itself, still held in Modena's Torre della Ghirlandina, stands as a silent, weathered witness. It is a testament not to the absurdity of war, but to the dangerous human capacity for reducing complex rivalries into simple, symbolic grievances to justify unimaginable violence with convenient narratives. It reminds us that behind every historical headline, every summarized conflict, lie thousands of individual tragedies, lost futures, and shattered lives. The War of the Bucket is a stark reminder that while the particular triggers may change, the fundamental forces of human pride, ambition, and prejudice remain tragically constant, ever ready to turn a simple object into a casus belli and a minor slight into a declaration of war. If this kept you up at night, subscribe. We post dark history every week.